Hey there, everybody. All right, so today we're going to be doing some more Q&A. So I've got testing JavaScript. Here, I'm logged in. Let me. Actually, I should just show you what it looks like logged in. Yeah, I'll do that really quick. So you go log in. Oh yeah, here we go. Send that email to get a magic login link. This is actually the most secure way to authenticate users. Even if it is a little bit annoying. So sorry, my computer goes kind of slow. Wait, what? Okay, sorry. I think I'm a little bit of a unique case because I am the instructor. So I'll have to figure out how to log in at the end. Dang it. Okay. Yeah, so this is Q&A today. So we're going to be answering any questions that you have. I've got the chat open right here so you can ask any questions that you have during the course of this live stream. And I also have a couple of questions I'm going to answer. Just before we start, I did, oh, here, deleted that. Whoops. I did do a testing Q&A a couple days ago and answered a ton of questions. And actually, I haven't yet done this, but somebody just today, I thought, added a comment with a table of contents. Maybe it was, yeah, thought so. Huh. Okay, well, they sent it to me in a DM on Twitter. So I'll add a table of contents here so you can watch through that. But yeah, so we do have a lot of questions that I answered already. And so if I did answer your question and it's like not a quick answer, then I'll refer you to that video, which actually I'll go ahead and paste that in the chat here. Even though hopefully you should be able to see it right away. So yeah, I also have a blog post or like a very, very active blog, where I talk about like a lot about testing. So if we go 2018, sort by oldest, latest, there we go. Yeah, tons and tons of stuff about testing, that you can learn from my blog. I think you'll like it. Yeah, lots and lots of blog posts about this. Okay, cool. So with that, I'm going to refresh really quick, just in case somebody added a couple more questions. I do have some questions that people have asked me on Twitter and elsewhere. So the first question is from this person. I'm not sure how to, Yuye? Yep, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But the question is, when is it acceptable to mock, and when is mocking a sign of bad code design? So yeah, that's actually that's a great question. So with unit tests, you mock pretty much, like, if you're thinking purist idea. Sorry, one second. If you're thinking the purist idea of mocking, you'll mock or of unit testing, you'll mock everything. Like, there are no dependencies that are connected in a unit test, in a pure unit test. And so typically that's really useful for things that have really complex logic. You just want to deal with this. Another scenario where you'll mock is for like making HTTP calls. So in my integration UI tests, I'm not going to be making any HTTP calls. Even in my node server, when I'm like, I hit the node server, I'm going to mock out the HTTP calls that the node server is going to make outside of itself. And then you have like these system integration tests where, yeah, like they'll communicate and stuff. My course doesn't really cover any backend stuff currently. Yeah, so mocking HTTP calls is like a totally appropriate thing to do. I do that all the time. Or really complicated third-party libraries. Like if they're like an animation library is a good example, where like I can trust that I'll be able to mimic the API in my mock without sacrificing the confidence that I'm looking for. And so we do that so that our tests don't take so long. So like you remove something, like you click on remove or something and it fades out. If you don't mock that, then you're going to have to wait for a full second or however long that animation is for that thing to be actually removed for the DOM, so you can verify that it has been removed. And so mocking that makes it so you can just assert synchronously, which is really useful. Makes your tests go faster. And so yeah, the idea behind mocking is just that, like, when you mock, you poke a hole in reality and you make a fake thing, and now you have zero confidence around that hole that you poked in reality. So you have to do extra things to either have to accept the fact that you don't have confidence around that, or you have to do extra things to give you that confidence back. And so that's why I spend most of my time in integration, because I feel like it's a nice balance between the like super heavy mocking of unit testing and the mock free of end-to-end testing. You get a lot of confidence without sacrificing the performance of your tests or the developer experience of your test. And so yeah, that's as far as like, so to directly answer the question here, let me get rid of that. When is it acceptable to mock? When is it a sign of bad code design? Yeah, I don't know. Like, I tend to mock less, and so mocking a lot, I wouldn't say is necessarily a sign of bad code design. Mocking a lot, I would say, is a sign of bad test design. And so, yeah, just don't mock as much. Focus on mocking your HTTP calls and like animation libraries. I really can't think of much more than that. I'm not gonna do any Redux mocking ever. I won't mock the router. I won't mock, and then for components that have like callbacks, like handle click or whatever, those are mock functions. So jest.fn or spy on or something. And so yeah, like I mock that all the time, because when I'm looking at a component that I'm trying to test, there are two users that I'm trying to verify their experience in using this component, right? So the end user is the one that's going to be clicking around, and so that's how I interact with the component. The developer user is the one that's passing props, and they're going to expect that their callbacks are called when the user interacts with the component. So I'm considering both of those users as I'm writing these tests. And so yeah, mock functions are totally appropriate. I do that all the time for that reason. Hopefully that helps answer your question. All right. Any advice for automating performance testing of React code or anything manipulating the DOM? Things like how much time passed between click on a button and the DOM being updated. Yeah, so this is actually one area that I haven't done a whole lot of work in, performance automated testing. So I know that there are tools for this. I feel like Google has released some tools for this, but I'm not familiar with the tools themselves, and I've never used them myself. I have most of the applications that I'm writing don't have huge performance requirements, and so I've never really used pure component or should component update. I've used it one time and then later realized that I didn't need it and I just removed it. So yeah, so I don't do a whole lot of performance stuff. Maybe one day I'll do more performance stuff, and then I'll have an opinion around this and some tips, but yeah, I don't do a whole lot with that. So sorry. Okay, I'm curious to know, you mentioned page, okay, so this was in response to an email, one of my newsletters. I said page objects, which is a poor practice. Why are page objects a poor practice, and have I written about it? No, I haven't written about this before, but page objects. I am in total agreement with what we have here. I'm creating custom. Yep. Okay. So what the Cypress docs say is, okay. So well, let me take a step back. The page objects pattern is basically you have this class or something that represents a page, and it has methods on it to click on buttons, to find inputs, to like all kinds of things. And the reason that you create this is because you're going to be visiting this page a lot, and you're going to be interacting with this page, and you want to keep your tests isolated from the implementation of the page. That's the idea. So let's see, they don't. There is a link, or I thought there was a link to where GitHub issues. Where Brian Mann, creator of Cypress, talks about page objects. I think there's an issue here. Let me look in here really quick. We'll just go to the GitHub repo because it's a really good one. I'll give you a link to. We'll go to issues, page objects. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure where that is, but search around a little bit. But Brian explains it really nicely. So, yeah, the page object pattern. The reason that I don't like it is because it's that separation between your test and identifying things on the page, where like clicking on the input and whatever. I think that's a separation that was created out of a to solve a problem that has a better solution. So the problem is that if you put all of the logic inside of your test, then you're going to be duplicating that logic a lot. So finding these different inputs and stuff, these query selectors are really weird. They're using IDs and class names and things. And what if I change the class name? Well, now I got to go update a million places. So that's why I say resilient. That's why I say to use data test IDs, or even better, I wrote this before I created React testing library and DOM testing library. But here, I'll paste a link to this in the chat. Even better is to use Cypress testing library. Oh, that's Travis. There's GitHub. Because if you're using these things, then your selectors are not confusing at all. They're really, really straightforward. And I show you how to do this in the course, actually. I show you first, here's how we select with the class names, and they're really weird looking because we're using CSS modules and emotion in the same project, and it's like, what is going on? And so then we switch over to Cypress testing library. And well, so with those other selectors, you're like, okay, yeah, I probably should make a page object out of this so I can have named things and make it really easy to understand what's going on. And so instead, if we use Cypress testing library, it's really straightforward. What you're clicking on, what you're selecting, all of that stuff. And in Cypress world, you wouldn't use the page object pattern much either. You just create custom commands, and I show you how to do that in the course as well. So we have a custom command for registration, for login, I don't think I added one for logout, but you could have one for logout. Different things to encapsulate a set of or series of commands so that you can duplicate that logic or avoid duplicating that logic in a lot of tests. So in short, the reason I say the page objects pattern is a bad practice is because it's solving a problem in a bad way. So the problem is my selectors are really messy, and there's a lot of duplication of across different pages. There are two reasons why that's bad. So first off, if your selectors are messy, you should do something to make your selectors better, like using a test ID or using Cypress testing library or because Cypress testing library supports test IDs, but to select elements by their text, which is how the user is going to interact with your application. And so, that makes sense to me that my test should do what my users are doing, right? Otherwise, I'm not confident that when my user uses it, it'll work. So, so that's one reason page object pattern isn't good because, or isn't a good solution, because if you can just make your selectors easier, then you don't have as much trouble. The other reason that I think it's a sign of a problem in your code base is because if you're visiting the same page multiple times, then you're not getting any additional confidence. And this was actually, if you go to my newsletter, which I will paste a link here also about that, My most recent newsletter was how to avoid slow and brittle end-to-end tests. This was what I sent yesterday. And basically, it's a common mistake when people make when writing end-to-end tests that lead to slow tests. And the common mistake is logging in or going through the login flow for every single test, because you need to test isolation. And so you're going to create these page objects so that you can easily go through that flow of like, okay, username, password, fill those in, log in, and then you can do the rest of your test. Well, once you've done that one time, then you have 100% confidence that that flow is working in the way that you've done that. And unless you do variations on that, then you're not getting any more confidence at all. And so it's wasted, totally wasted effort. Those 99 extra runs don't give you any extra confidence. There's no upside, all downside. So that's why I suggest that page objects are indicative of another problem. You're visiting the same page over and over again, executing the same selectors, or like querying for the same elements, doing the same things without getting any extra effort. Now, if you're not doing those things, then that's, and you are actually selecting elements but doing different things with them, that's fine. But maybe you could just make your selectors better, and then you wouldn't need a page object. So that's why I suggest that page objects are not a great great pattern. If you do have things that so in the course we verify that the user's been logged in properly, and so we just make a couple of assertions, and we have some duplicate assertions between registration and login, because once the user's been logged in there, we should show their username and stuff like that. And so we have some custom commands, or we create a custom command that just asserts that the user is logged in. We assert that the user is on the home page, stuff like that. And so those are like totally legit, because an assertion is like super fast. There's no reason to not really do an assertion. I don't see any reason to not repeat those. Cool. Okay. Hopefully that was helpful to that individual. Let me just refresh here, see if there's any other questions. Yeah, we got one. Sorry I'm late. 2 questions. First, based on your advocacy for user-like testing, which is great. Thank you, John. Should we avoid traditional unit tests unless absolutely necessary? Okay, so answering that first question, John, I would suggest that unit tests are actually a great thing. Especially for a really complex function. Like, let's say that you've got a React component, just for example, or Angular component, whatever, and it's got a lot of complex logic in here, handling a bunch of different edge cases and things like that. See if there are things inside of there that you could extract to pure functions, and like just pass it all the arguments or whatever. And then you can test that like insanely easily, because unit tests are just so easy to write comparatively. And so see if you can extract the complex stuff into pure functions, unit test all of that stuff. You don't even have to mock when you're doing stuff like that, because it's all pure functions anyway. So unit test all of that stuff. And then you'd have a single integration test that just goes through and renders that component to ensure that it's actually using that dependency properly. You don't necessarily have to assert that it's using the dependency, because that's like the user doesn't know that it's using a dependency, but just verify that the behavior is working as expected. And so you get the confidence that all the edge cases are handled through the unit test, or the various unit tests that you write, and then confidence that that unit is being used properly through that integration test. So I would combine those strategies. Unit testing is awesome. I definitely suggest using that. When you're unit testing something that's a pure function like that, your user is no longer the end user who's going to be clicking around a UI. Your user is now just the developer who's using the component. And so that's, so you're still doing user-like testing, your user is different. And that same thing applies with React components as well. Your user is whoever's rendering your component, as well as the user who's interacting with it. So you have 2 users in that scenario. Second, given that functional component testing, especially snapshot tests, are slower, not less valuable, just slower, have you felt any pains with test times in larger projects, and recommendations for handling that, if so? So I actually don't test function components a whole lot. if it doesn't have like much logic in there, then I don't see that being valuable to test. Like lots of times you'll have a bunch of little function components around here, and then you have this one stateful component that kind of renders all those, passes state, and kind of manages that. The only one that I'm going to test is that one stateful one at the top, and I'll just render all of those things. Those function components are implementation details to that stateful component where I'm doing all my logic and stuff. So yeah, generally I don't test just function components. I'll test the stateful ones, or the ones that use state, I guess. So yeah, as far as like, I don't really use snapshot tests either. I should mention that as well. Most of the time, I find snapshot testing to be a bit of a drag on performance, and so I kind of recommend against, a drag on the team velocity more than performance. I don't really care too much about test performance so long as it's fast enough. Like, yeah, then it's fine. But yeah, I'm not too concerned about performance. It's mostly about what it does to the team. Like, oh, we've got 1,500 lines of snapshot diff. I'm not going to review that. Nobody reviews that. We'll just trust the engineer looked visually and said, yeah, this is fine. So yeah, I don't really do snapshot tests. If I'm doing snapshot tests, then I'm going, actually, I've got a blog post about this, effective snapshot testing. See, I told you my blog is full of stuff like this, where I kind of talk about this and where it can be useful. The real, yeah, here we go. So avoid huge snapshots and take smaller, more focused one. While you're at it, see if you can actually change it from a snapshot to a more explicit assertion. So yeah, you take a snapshot of the whole component and you're like, actually, no, that's, there's only like this section that I'm trying to verify that it's going to stay the same. So you narrow it down to the thing that you need. And then you realize, oh, all I really need to do is verify that the input's value is this certain value. So you can make it, make that assertion a little bit more explicit, and that's good for the team, it's good for performance, good for everything. So avoid large snapshots. Okay, let me refresh one more time, see if anybody said anything. I couldn't find this, so I'm asking here, is there a good practice to write logic in test cases, like using if else? No, there's not, because it's a really bad practice. Yeah, if you're, actually Cypress has some stuff on this. Cypress, if else, conditional testing, that's what they call it. So I'll paste a link to this. This is a really good article about the idea here, but I strongly recommend against doing this, just like Cypress is recommending in here. It's a code smell, I guess. It indicates to you that your tests are non-deterministic. And that's not really a useful thing. So I strongly recommend against writing tests that use ifs and else's. If you're doing that, look into not doing that anymore. Okay, keep on getting more questions here. One more thing I'd like to ask, is it necessary to test each and every variable in a component in unit testing? So think less about the code, think more about the use cases. So so take a step back from the code, don't even look at the code, and start typing out all the use cases that code is supposed to support. Now, if it's code that you didn't write yourself, or it's been a long time since you've seen it, you don't know all the use cases it's supposed to support, then yeah, you gotta like look at the code. But I would actually go around the code base and see, okay, how is this code being used, and write tests for all of the ways it's being used. Don't think about variables. That will lead you to writing implementation detail tests. So think more about use cases, and when you do that, you'll find yourself covering all the cases. And if you're missing some cases, then you can be like, oh yeah, I forgot there's another use case, and then you can write another test to cover that. And so in the course I show you how to use code coverage. I even show you how it works. I show you code that has been manipulated to support code coverage, so you see exactly what's happening to the code so that it can measure that. Though in the most recent version of Node, I think that V8 is now exposing its internal code coverage mechanism, which is pretty cool. So we might not have to do that in the long term. Either way, that's like totally shielded from your eyes, so you don't need to see that anyway. But it does help to understand how this is all working. So I do show you that. But yeah, when you look at that coverage report, it can kind of give you some hints at like, oh yeah, there's this other edge case that I'm not covering. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, sweet. I'm going to go over here to look at questions from here. What's the topic about? Testing. What are the tangible determinants of testing with synthetic events? Need something more than Dan. Dan told me not to. Okay. Oh, detriments. That's the word. Yeah. So if go and look in the the simulate Reacts. Okay. So just to fill out everybody else in, the React testing library used to use simulate, which is built into React, so that it could fire events and things. The nice thing about using simulate was you don't have to actually mount the component into the document to test it. But simulate is pretty buggy, and it has like its internal implementation is really bad. Dan told me that they are going to change it significantly, and it's it's buggy, and he told me not to use it, and I kind of trust Dan. Another thing that I don't like about simulate is it makes it, I have been unsuccessful in creating a bundle of React testing library that can work in the browser because of simulate, and so I want to get rid of simulate so I can do that. Some people have been asking for that. So yeah, that's pretty much the biggest thing. Also, using simulate is kind of an implementation detail, so I prefer fire event because it's like real DOM events. We're also kind of working on this user events package right now, so that you can fire events the same way that a user would. So instead of fire event change on your input, you're going to user event.type, and you'll type some text in the input, and that'll fire a bunch of events, just like those events would be fired in the regular browser, which is sort of what Cypress is doing. So maybe it'll be a little bit slower, but you'll get a more real experience in your tests, something that aligns closer to the user. So look forward to that. That's something that's being worked on right now. Can we put logic in our tests? If else, I think you were the one who tweeted that. So answered that. With unit testing, a function that takes multiple options parameters, how do you prefer to organize the assertions for all iterations of the possible combinations? Okay, so I don't talk about this in the course. Maybe I'll add a lesson like this in the future. But Jest has this sweet new each thing called Jest Each, which allows you to give an array of inputs and then have all of those, like have that generate a bunch of tests. You can even do this tag template literal thing, which is like kind of interesting. And yeah, have A, B, and expected, and then you'll get those as your object here. I actually kind of found this to be a little bit confusing, so I actually still use Jest in case, which I'm a pretty big fan of. I think it's really good library here, which allows you to do kind of the same thing. So here's your inputs. I use this all the time. This is especially useful for pure functions that take many inputs and variations on things. I have this currency formatter, actually paypal.me, can't see odds. If you pass a number after in the PayPal me URL, then that's the value you'll get. And then you can also provide a currency. So if I say 400 JPY, and then that'll set the currency. If you do JPY 400, that will also set the currency. And then there's, I feel like there's more before I show you this other one. So you can also do, oh yeah, pi, and that will give you 3.14. And you can do pi JPY, and that'll give you that in yen, or let's see, what's another euros? Yeah, EUR, and then pi. And so like all of this parsing logic, and check this out. Pizza. $9 for pizza, and so then we also add the currency, so it's €9. I don't know. It's just kind of a joke, but we also have you put a money bag in there, then it's going to do a random amount between 0 and 100, I think, which is kind of fun. So all of these little Easter egg things, or legitimately useful things, we have, and I have this test in, and by the way, you can feel free to, I'll just take this opportunity right now. Feel free to test that out, see if it actually works. No, but that parsing logic I've extracted into its own pure function. Just pass it the URL string, and it'll return me an object that has like the amount and the currency. And that's like fairly complex. We've got some special rules and stuff. And so I just have this giant list using just in case of all of these tests to verify that that logic is working as expected. So that's a really, really awesome use case for testing like this. And I should probably add another lesson. I probably will add another lesson of using just in case as well as just.each, because it's really, really useful. So I'll look forward to that. All right. Will you go through Babel and Webpack setups? So I don't actually show you how to set up Babel and Webpack. That would be a totally different course, but I show you how to set up Jest when you're using Babel and Webpack. So if we go to, actually we got it right here, testing JavaScript, right here, configure Jest for testing JavaScript applications. This is in a real world application that's using Babel and Webpack and custom loaders and dynamic imports and all of this other stuff. And so I show you how to configure Jest in an environment where you're using these features from these tools. Could be a sign of bad code as well. Too much mocking usually needed for legacy apps. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. When you want to test content behind a login. Yeah. So in the course I show you how to do that. How to avoid going through the login flow over and over and over again. And in this blog post or in my latest newsletter, I talk about that as well. See, this is why you should subscribe to the newsletter, because you'd know this if you read it. So yeah, the solution is, here's what you do. Make the same HTTP calls in your tests that your application makes when you register and log in a new user. They're way faster, and there's less of a chance for negative failures. And as long as you keep at least one test around that actually does the registration and login flow, you haven't lost any confidence that that flow works. So that's what you do. And I show you how to do that in the course. The thing is to test the login flow only once yet. Then yes, probably keep the token for further tests. No. Hopefully what I just explained verifies or is clear. This is tested against the UAT environment. User acceptance testing environment. Is that what that is? Yeah, like it depends. Like you can do this locally. In the course we do it locally, and I show you how to set up CI for this too. So whatever you want to do there. The backend REST would you need to run it locally to see the database? So there are so many ways to do this, and this is why I actually don't show you how to set up the database or anything like that, because everybody's gonna have their application work differently. So yeah, you can seed the database. You can just run it locally, and yeah, like seeding the database is normally like if I had my choice and performance weren't a problem. Between every single test, I would reset the entire database to a clean state. That's not normally very practical. Yeah, because that would be like, often in real production applications, it takes us a hot minute to actually do that. Maybe not a minute, but yeah, it'll take some time and make your tests take a long time. So you try to find a good balance between isolation and practicality, and it really just kind of depends on your application. What is your opinion on using TypeScript with React? Do you think it is a must? I think that it is a must to use static typing when you're writing JavaScript. So this is why we have static at the base of our trophy. If you don't have a base, then your trophy looks funny. Just kidding. So the static typing will eliminate a bunch of test cases. Blog. Let's see, eliminate an entire category of bugs with a few simple tools. In here, I talk about static code analysis as a form of testing. In the course, I show you how to use FlowType and how to set that up. I do not show you how to use TypeScript, but I don't care which one you want to do. You can adapt this material for TypeScript if you want to, totally fine. In a real application, if you don't like bugs, for simple mistakes, then I suggest using a type system. Added timestamps, you asked, I answer part 1. Thank you so much, Andrew. You're the best. Okay, thanks. So I'll read it. I'm a student, a front-end master's, and my question is the testing thing more advanced of what I taught in my front-end master's version. Yes, it is. So there's, I answered this in the other video, but I'll just say really quick, there's way more material, way more in depth, and the supporting material is way, way awesome. You've got to get your hands on the fully annotated transcripts with inline code and screenshots. That is really, really helpful supporting material. Also, these interviews are not to be underestimated, and the printables are super fun and great and useful. Okay, what are the use cases for unit or end-to-end testing, which makes sense and when? So use cases for unit testing, pure functions, no dependencies. That's a really great use case. Sometimes if you have a complex component that does have dependencies and you can't really extract that logic or whatever, then severing the connection between that component and its dependencies through mocks is another use case for unit testing. Actually, you know what? I've got to talk about this. Not specifically about this, but if you go to my website and go to talks and then search for wheel, it is what we can learn about testing from the wheel. And this is like a 5-minute talk. It's very quick, where I talk about some of the distinctions between these different forms of testing. I think that you'll enjoy it. But yeah, so the integration testing is where you spend most of your time. You just don't mock as much stuff. You mock HTTP calls and animation libraries, whatever else, not as much. But then you go to end-to-end testing to do like happy path kind of user experience. So the user logs in, they click on a couple buttons, they add some things to their cart, like it's a full-on bigger flow. Whereas unit testing is like very focused on this one module. Integration testing is verifying that these modules work together, like in the front end, isolated from the back end, and then in the back end, isolated from the front end. And then end-to-end testing is like everything's working together. Depending on the size of your application and your organization, you may also have system integration tests that just verify these systems are talking to each other properly, but there's no UI. But generally, you can get lots of that coverage through end-to-end tests. So I would personally, since I don't do a whole lot of back-end, maybe this is what's informing my opinion, but personally, I feel like end-to-end tests can get you most of the way there between those two. So, okay, that's going to be it for me. I think this was a fun session, and I'll just really quick, I'll go back here, just see if anybody has tweeted more questions. I joined my team late, and I'm writing test cases for code that is already written. Yep, that's great. Your team is going to love you for making them more confident that they can ship. Okay, I'm going to jump out. This was fun. I will see you all later. Have a nice, wonderful time. And yeah, testingjavascript.com. I'll just go ahead and paste a little link here. Have a nice day. See you. Oh, one last thing. I almost forgot. So if you go to, kcd.im dev tips, I'll paste a link here. And then you can see my scheduled live streams. And tomorrow is test-driven development, when it works and when it doesn't. So tune in live for that. You can go there right now and click set reminder, beep, and you will be able to be notified when I start. All right, see ya. Have a nice day.